Welcome to the Woelke-Stoffel house at Founders Park in Anaheim. The Woelke-Stoffel house might sound like it has a funny name, but it's actually named for the Woelke family who built the house and for the Stoffel family who lived in the house the longest. The Woelke-Stoffel house is a Queen Anne style house. Queen Anne homes are all very different, but they share some common characteristics. For instance, they have multiple stories, large wraparound porches, stained glass windows, and a tower or turret on the top of the house. Now, at the time the Woelke-Stoffel house was built, it would have been pretty impressive. The homes around here would have been mostly single-story homes, kind of like the one next door, the Mother Colony house. So people would have been impressed when they saw this house being built and would have liked to go inside, which is what we're going to do right now. Come on in. The family would have used the side porch door or back porch door to enter the house, but we're guests, so we're going to use the front door. Now we're in the hallway of the Woelke-Stoffel house. But before we tour the rooms, I'm going to give you a little history behind the house. This is Mr. John Woelke, and he and his wife Wilhelmina came to the United States from Germany in 1878. They lived in Chicago and had a restaurant. And then in 1896, they built the home here in Anaheim, and they lived here with their 3 teenage sons. The house was originally built on Center Street, just a couple of blocks down from the main part of town. And it was the main thoroughfare, or the main street, that all of the traffic would have gone by. And so they could have seen everybody coming and going from town. After they lived here for only 3 years, they moved to Los Angeles. And then Mary and Peter Stoffel moved into the house with their 9 children. They owned and operated a grocery store in town and eventually became citrus ranchers. Mary died in 1941, but Peter continued to live in the house until he died in 1948. After his death, John J. and Lyra Mae Dwyer purchased the house because they wanted people to be able to tour the home someday and see how people lived in Victorian times. So they had it moved here in 1949. Actually pulled by a truck through the streets about a mile away. It was across the street from St. Boniface, and they moved it here to this location on West Street. Now let's take a look at the house. What did you notice about it first? I saw the colorful stained glass windows above the front doors and above the stairway. Look at all the beautiful wood used here. Mary Stoffel would head to this turret nook for a little peace and quiet away from the kids, while she wrote letters to family and friends far away. She may have also used this space to have tea with a close friend. Most of the time, guests would be invited into the parlor to visit. But before they went in, they'd leave their personal items here at the hall tree. They'd put hats, purses. They might also check their hair, that it didn't get messed up while they were riding here in an open horse-drawn carriage. These pocket doors to the parlor would have remained closed most of the time. The family only used the parlor for guests on special occasions and maybe on Sunday after church. Let's go into the parlor. The family would have had their nicest furniture and decorations on display in the parlor for guests to see. Notice another stained glass window above the piano. This room also had a fireplace to keep guests comfortable when the weather was cold. And they had a picture rail on top of the room to hold their large, heavy frames and pictures. This veining couch was a popular piece of furniture for Victorians. The ladies at that time wore something called a corset. And you would put this around your waist and then have your mom or sister tie it in the back, and it would give you very good posture. You'd stand straight and tall, but sometimes you'd get it tightened a little bit too tight. Maybe you wanted to show that you had a very small waist, so it was a little bit too tight. And then you couldn't breathe very well. So then you'd lay down on the fainting couch and you'd be able to catch your breath and lay back for a while. And so that's why they built these fainting couches, was for ladies. So if you ever see these kind of couches in a home, you could say, I know that that's a fainting couch. The family and guests would gather in the parlor for conversation, to make music, or to play quiet parlor games like cards or charades. If you were a guest for a dinner party, you might play a game before moving to the dining room for dinner. The family normally ate in the kitchen, but sat in the dining room on special occasions. For a dinner party, the table was set with the best plates and silver. Notice the second fireplace intended to keep guests comfortable, and the beautiful built-in shelving here in the dining room. This is a reed organ. These were really popular in the 20th century. And they had pedals. So what you'd do is you'd push the pedals like you were riding a bike, and that would send air over the reeds, which would cause the music to play. So it was kind of like riding a bicycle while playing music. A Victorian dinner party could last for hours. The food was served in courses. So you might first have soup, followed by salad, maybe several types of fish, then your main dinner course with a vegetable, followed by fruit and cheese, and then finally dessert. And the dinner guests were expected to eat just small portions from each of these courses, so they didn't get too much to eat. But dinner took quite a long time. It might be 2 or 3 hours at the dinner table. By the time the Woelke-Stoffel house was built, the city of Anaheim had nice clean water, and it was fashionable to offer nice cold ice water for your guests to drink. So someone invented this pitcher. It's silver plated, and it's very, very heavy, and it would keep the water very cold. So they invented this tilting water pitcher so that you wouldn't have to lift such a heavy pitcher and try to pour the water. The door to the kitchen would have remained closed during a dinner party. You wouldn't want your guests to see the meal preparation and the dirty dishes and things. But let's go into the kitchen now. The kitchen was the social center of the house. The family didn't have a living room to hang out in. They hung out in the kitchen. The family would use the back porch door or the side door to get into the house. The kids would do their homework at this table, or a large kitchen table. Mom and grandma and the girls of the family would be cooking up to 3 meals a day here, probably preparing along this table. And the family didn't have running water in the house, so there was no kitchen sink. They had to pump water outside and bring water in for a dry sink. When the Stoffel family moved into the house, they probably had a coal or wood burning stove. But after a few years, they would have upgraded to something like this. This is a gas stove. Believe it or not, this is the refrigerator. When the house was first built, it was built around the same time that the first electric plant went into the town of Anaheim. So it was built without electric appliances. This refrigerator uses ice. We also could call it an ice box. An iceman would deliver a block of ice to your house, and you would put it in the top here. And then in the bottom section, you would put your food. And it didn't hold a whole lot, but it would hold enough for leftovers, maybe to keep your milk cool, things like that. The family would have kept dry goods like sugar, flour, canned goods, and maybe their pots and pans in this room, which was the pantry. They also had a basement where the house originally stood. And in the basement, they could keep things like fruits and vegetables because it would stay nice and cold and keep it fresh. And they may have even had a barrel of fresh pickles or sauerkraut because they were a German family. Now, wealthy families at the time would have had a telephone in the house. This telephone was built in 1908. And what you did was 40 people shared a single phone line. So if you were to pick up the receiver and listen, you might hear one of those 40 people on the phone talking to their friend, which wasn't very nice. You didn't want to listen in on the phone. To make a phone call, what you'd do is you'd turn this handle and it would ring the operator. And you'd say, "Operator, I'd like to place a call, please." And then let them know who it was you'd like to speak to. Now, before we go upstairs, I wanted to show you, do you see how low this doorknob is? All of the doorknobs in the house, all of the clothing, everything in the house was smaller because on average, Victorian people were smaller than people are today. So just take a look around the house and notice the things that look shorter and smaller to you. Now let's head upstairs. This is the largest bedroom, and it would have been Mr. and Mrs. Stoffel's bedroom. Notice they had a fireplace in the room to keep them warm and comfortable in the winter months. This mantle clock would have had to have been wound for it to work. It's not like automatic like our clocks today where we just use a battery. And it would have been a third grader's job to change things like the month and the day of the week, etc. on the clock. The house didn't have running water and there were no bathrooms. So what they would do is they would fill up a pitcher like this one at night before they went to bed. And in the morning, they could pour the water into this bowl and then use it to wash up or to shave. Now, you'll notice all the fashions in the room. There's a lot of hats, and everyone wore hats, men and women. And what the ladies would do is they'd put their hair into a bun on top of their head, and then they'd put their hat on, and they'd use a hat pin like one of these to stick the hat onto that bun of hair so that it wouldn't fly away in the wind. And they like to have nice, pretty hat pins to kind of show off. Notice this one that has an orange on it. That would have been a perfect hat pin for a woman living in Orange County, especially one that had a citrus farm. This small circular room was used for sewing and doing fine needlework. The windows allowed a lot of light in the room. The sewing machine and cabinet were made around 1900. Just like the reed organ that we saw in the dining room, the sewing machine ran on pedal power. Here is one of the children's rooms. This would have probably been the boys' bedroom, and we think at the time the Stoffels lived here that 4 of the Stoffel boys shared a bedroom, 4 girls shared a bedroom, and the oldest son had a room of his own in the attic. The kids would have shared a bed back then. In the winter months, that would be good because you could stay warm by sleeping 3 or 4 kids to a bed. This is a photograph of the 3rd grade class at Central School in Anaheim, around the time this house was built. Notice the outfits worn by the boys and girls. Girls wore dresses and often wore a pinafore or apron over their dress to keep it clean. Boys wore button-down shirts with collars and usually short pants that went just below the knee. Some wore jackets. Both girls and boys wore long socks and boots. Nobody in the picture is smiling. Do you think that these boys and girls ever laughed and had fun? Kids worked very hard in Victorian times, but they also played. They laughed and had a good time, just like us. But people didn't usually smile in their pictures because the photographs at first took a long time to take. You might have to hold a position for 5 minutes. Otherwise, the picture would be blurry. Plus, they were very expensive. You would have to have a photographer come out with his equipment to take a picture, and that would cost a lot of money. So people got used to not smiling and just trying to look their best. These are some toys that would have been popular in Victorian times, but a lot of Victorian kids, they may not have had money to buy toys. So their parents would help them to make their own toys from things that they could find around the house. Your father might work with wood, and your mom or sisters might have some ribbons from clothing that they made for the family. And you could make this toy. This is called Jacob's Ladder. And you would just take some blocks of wood and some ribbons and hook them together. And when you turn the top block, it causes all of the other blocks to fall down below it. So that's one toy you could make. One thing that most everybody had were clothespins or clothes pegs. And you would use these to hang your clothing out on the line to dry. So what you could do is you might draw a face on it. You could glue some yarn for hair. When you made clothes, you might have extra scraps, and you can make little clothes for the dolls and use these in your dollhouse. So that's another thing that you could do. There's another game you can use with clothes pegs, and that's a game where you use a milk bottle, but most everybody had a milk bottle. You'd either have cows and milk them and put the milk into a bottle to use on the table for meals, or you'd have the milkman deliver milk and you'd have milk in a milk bottle. So when you were done, you'd have the bottle, you'd have a clothes peg, and you could play this game. Now, people would take turns and they would hold the clothes peg up at like waist height, and then they would try to drop it into the milk bottle, and you'd earn a point every time you'd made it in. Thank you for joining us today at Founders Park for this virtual tour of the Woelke-Stoffel house. I hope you can come back sometime and visit us in person and tour the home and be able to try out some of the games for yourself. For more information about the history of Anaheim and to see some historic photos, just go to the Anaheim Public Library website and look in our catalog. Bye, everyone.